Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Friday, January 23rd. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we take a detour back into some breaking news from the last few days. We had a big trade go down on Thursday. MacKenzie Gore has been traded to the Texas Rangers. We'll talk about the implications of that deal, the return the Nationals got. We're going to dig into the Freddy Peralta trade, which happened earlier this week since we last spoke on news-related matters. Big deal between the Brewers and Mets. We also had Cody Bellinger's reunion with the Yankees. Covered that in a short on our YouTube page, but did not discuss it in full on an episode. We got some mailbag questions and comments from recent episodes as well. So the outfield previews will get underway to begin next week. So this is kind of your traditional Rates and Barrels, 5 episodes a week here on out. You know, hard to believe we're already there in this late part of January, but it was minus 17 Fahrenheit when I woke up this morning. So really nothing to do outside for me anyway.
You know, what we started doing in our household was in anticipation of the next MCU movie, Doomsday, which will include the X-Men for the first time. The X-Men are joining the modern MCU. We're watching all the X-Men movies. There are a lot of them. And we finished the first trilogy over the last week or so. And now we're into the Wolverine ones, which are the best ones.
All right. There you go. There's your pop
That's something you do when it's minus 17 or like 55.
Yeah, 55. A little chilly. You got to stay inside there in Northern California. But I know I've missed those winters a lot, especially having spent so many years in the Midwest just dealing with it. Let's get to the baseball news. MacKenzie Gore traded to the Rangers. It was a 6-player deal. Gavin Feen, Abby Ortiz, Devin Fitzgerald. There's a hyphen between Fitz and Gerald if you're searching for him on various sites. Alejandro Rosario and Yeremy Cabrera go back to the Nationals in the return. Keith Law's recap of the deal, I think, summed it up extremely well. Feen is the most intriguing player in the deal from a long-term perspective. Best in the deal by a mile, according to Keith. The only one in my top 100, which is coming out on Monday on The Athletic, by the way, and a potential top 20 prospect in the sport if he has the year I expect from him. So a pretty typical haul, I think, for a player like Gore, someone that has, I think, maybe one more level he could still reach. And it's interesting because Gore goes from a rebuilding team to at least a wild card contender, maybe even an AL West contender, depending on how you view the Astros and Mariners right now and how high you are on the Rangers from a player development perspective and the steps forward their young players might take. It's 2 years of Gore before he hits free agency. It kind of sounds like the Nats did well, skewing a little more on the quantity over top-end quality perspective, but Feen just being drafted last summer gives them a shot at someone that could take that sort of big rise up prospect list like Keith hinted at. So the return might be a little more quantity over quality, but that is, again, going to hinge a lot on the development of Feen, who was just drafted last summer. What do you think of this package overall for Gore?
We have a piece from Ken Rosenthal today about reactions across the industry to this deal, and I found one quote to be interesting. Somebody called it basically a surplus value model win for a model type trade for the Nationals. And you could look at this and say, oh man, Alejandro Rosario, maybe an interesting pitcher. He is about to get Tommy John. Like, it's not like he just had Tommy John. It's like he needs to get Tommy John. So that, you don't know if that's ever going to pan out. Then, a lot of the other guys in this trade were like the 18th and 20th best prospects. There are no top 100 prospects. And as Rosenthal pointed out, in the Freddy Peralta deal, which we'll talk about soon, there were 2 top 100 prospects in there, and they were closer to the top of the Mets, list of prospects. So you could sort of cast aspersions on this deal and say they didn't get enough and they focused on getting too many shots at it. However, there is also this subterfuge that Taboni, who was the head scout, the leader of the draft in Boston, apparently wanted to take Gavin Feen and had him like near the top of his board, and the Rangers took him away from him. And then I think if you compare this sort of 1-for-1 with the Shane Baz deal, you get a lot of similarities. Just a recently drafted, don't know what his positional value type guy. I think Gavin Fiend fits a little bit the Austin Overn part of the Shane Baz trade, which is like a recently drafted pit player that might still be really good. That was a high draft pick. You have the 5 players like Shane Baz got. I would say that maybe the players overall that the Baltimore Orioles gave up for Shane Baz were a little bit better. But maybe Shane Baz is better. Maybe Shane Baz has more upside. So a lot of this does hinge on MacKenzie Gore's, quality. And there was a question of could they coach him up and get more for him later? And I guess they decided this is the best they were going to get.
Well, yeah, in 2 years, I mean, you can change a lot in 2 years, but he's been in the organization. There are some holdovers. I think Sean Doolittle's still a part of the pitching program for the Nats, even with Taboni taking over in the front office. Maybe they felt like they made most of the adjustments they could make already. The other question, though, with Gore and with all the Nats pitching is just how much does the quality of the Nats infield defense these past couple of seasons drag down some of the things that we've seen from their pitching staff, right? I mean, even if you don't look at the Rangers and say, that's a great defensive team, it's probably a better defensive team than the Nats because most teams are better than the Nats on that side. So that alone could help Gore. The ballpark in Arlington played really pitcher-friendly in 2025, and no one has really pinned down, at least publicly, why exactly that was the case. So, he's moving into a more pitcher-friendly environment, playing on a better team, at least some sort of upgrade defensively. And then there is the possibility that
it might
change the pitch mix.
It might be a huge upgrade potentially, because by outs above average, the Nationals were 30th in infield team defense with a -27. And the Rangers were 9th with a +12. Now they do lose Marcus Semien, and replace him with Brandon Nimmo. But I think Josh Smith, once you give him a position, I think he's going to win that second base position. And given that he's a former shortstop himself or, has played that position, I know that the defensive numbers haven't been amazing for Josh Smith, but I bet you if he settled down into one position, this will be a major defensive upgrade for MacKenzie Gore on the infield.
So what we see right now in the projections, ATC's got a 3.94 ERA and a 1.28 WHIP on Gore for the upcoming season. This is coming off a year where he had a career best 27.2% K rate. It looks like a number 2, number 3 starter sort of package right now in terms of what he brings to the table. And if that's what he is for the Rangers, that's still an upgrade. That's a guy that's going to start a playoff game for you, if you're a playoff team. So ultimately, I think it was smart on their part to do this. I don't think even a guy like Ortiz, who maybe could have helped them at a possible position of need if Jake Berger is hurt again and doesn't bounce back the way we think he will, Ortiz maybe could have been an option for them in the first base DH mix. Like that's as much as they were going to get from this entire group they traded away in 2026. So you're giving up some future value, but you're getting someone that does help you in October if you find your way back into the playoffs.
Yeah, that was Chris Young's point in the Ken Rosenthal column, just being like, I don't want people to think that I won this trade or whatever. He's like, he was talking about like, these are good players we gave up. They're just going to take some time. And, we wanted something that could help us on the roster this year. And from a projection standpoint, if you're looking at Gore, it's possible that some of these projections are a little light on the effects that could happen that have nothing to do with Gore himself, which is to say they all project him for, basically the same home run rate he's had for his whole career. But we know that that stadium there, Globe Life, has been trending towards being very pitcher friendly. And, there's some aspects of that may have to do with the fact that it is a dome and that that might make it really easy to model fly balls. And so fly ball batting average on balls in play there is tanking. And I think that it might just be really easy to set up those cards where you say, hey, outfielder, left fielder, you move 3 steps this way, that sort of stuff. That might go into his favor because Gore is a fly ball pitcher. So if that home run rate is a little bit high and that BABIP is a little bit high, then you can change his projections a little bit and make him more of a 3.5, 3.6 ERA guy with a 1.22 WHIP. And you haven't even talked about what MacKenzie Gore is as a pitcher or what he needs to do or any of that stuff. You're just saying, we're going to change all the stuff around him. It's a lot of the Pirates and Yankees used to make trades like this, where the Pirates are like, we'll take Ivan Nova and we don't need Ivan Nova to be any better. Just not be in Yankee Stadium, right?
Yeah. He's not going to get crushed by lefties as badly now that he's out of Yankee Stadium. Was probably the first thing they thought about.
Yeah. So, I mean, then you look at like MacKenzie Gore and like, what can he do? And I think there's a couple things that are interesting. Here's one, his fastball velocity. So he has these second half fades, and you can see it in the splits, but you can also see it in the fastball velocities. Look at this. This is his fastball velocity by season, by game. And you could just see every season he starts out, 96, 95, 96 plus, and he ends it, a tick or two below that. Last year, though, and this feeds my larger point, which is that I think that Gore's going to get better, but I don't think it'll be a huge one thing. I don't think it'll just be like he's going to get older and he's going to know how to pace himself better. If you look at the velocity loss over the course of the season, each season, last year was the best one. It was the one where he was the most consistent over the course of the season. And I just think that consistency is one of those things that happens to veterans, and it's part of why veterans get better. One way that we did this was we aged the volatility of hitters over time. We found that their volatility went down because they figured out how to pace themselves, what kind of adjustments they could make, that sort of deal. So that's one way that Gore will get better. Another thing that's a little bit interesting is I've talked to Gore, and he's like, I'm trying to get more horizontal on my curveball. This is before he started trying to get more horizontal on his curveball. So you go back to 2023, and this is him versus Clayton Kershaw. It's kind of remarkable. I mean, Kershaw had a bigger curveball. It didn't end up mattering as much, though, because Kershaw's curveball is not his biggest, weapon. It's the fastball and the slider. The reason I have 2023 MacKenzie Gore on the right and 2025 Clayton Kershaw on the left is because things have changed over time. So now let's switch over to MacKenzie Gore over the last 2 years. What you'll see is MacKenzie Gore's arm has been drifting downwards. So in the comp to Kershaw in 2023, he had a 50-degree arm angle. In 2024, he had a 47-degree arm angle. 2025, he had a 45-degree arm angle. And you can see that what used to be a very vertical pitch movement plot has turned more sideways. Then you look at the curveball. When he had a straight up and down curveball, but a lower arm slot, Stuff Plus said, hey, wait a second. This is kind of cool. You kind of have the Kershaw curveball, but you have a lower arm slot. And it said that the curve was a 109 Stuff Plus with a 100 Location Plus and a 240 xwOBA. It liked the curve better in 2024. In 2025, he's trying to put more sideways on the curveball, and it looks a little bit more conventional. Now the curveball Stuff Plus is down to 106, Location Plus now to 93, and xwOBA up to 293. It's still a good pitch. And my larger point is he could just place the curveball he has a little bit better next year, refine his curveball locations, pitch in a nicer park, get some confidence, pace himself better, keep the velo over the course of the season, and have his best season next year. And he could do it without changing anything big. But he also is joining a new crew with the new analytics, and they may say, hey, you've been drifting this way, and you've been adding curveball. Like, can we do that old curveball that was like the straight up and down Kershaw curveball from a 47-degree arm angle? Can we do that one instead? And he might be like, yeah, I threw that for a whole season. Let's go back to that one. Sure, this was the grip I did that year. Let's do it. So there's some small tweaks they could make to the arsenal. I know that Sarah Langs pointed out that there's a lot of whiffs in his changeup, in Gore's changeup, and it does have a high whiff rate. However, once it gets hit into play, it gets blasted pretty hard. And that's, I think, what Stuff Plus is capturing when it says it's a mediocre pitch. So I might focus, if I was him, on fastball slider curve. And I think I would actually, lean a little bit into some of those Kershaw comps.
Yeah, be fun to see it actually happen, given that was where things started for MacKenzie Gore on draft night out of high school. It's an insane comp to put on somebody as their big league career is about to start. Like, no, just in terms of, hey, here's a guy that's going to the Hall of Fame. We think he's this guy. Like, is that fair?
I think that happens a lot on draft night. They're like, could be Francisco Lindor, and you're like, Okay.
Right. The highest possible outcome ends up being like the one they throw out there as the comps, like because the median comps aren't as exciting. Right? I get it. It's interesting though. 3 pitchers that have been traded this winter: Edward Cabrera, Shane Baz, and MacKenzie Gore, all being drafted right next to each other in terms of their current ADPs. Who do you like best of that trio for the upcoming season if you're choosing from that group?
Yeah, it's a fascinating group. The power, the velo goes to Cabrera. He probably has the worst injury history of the 3, although Baz did have surgery. Command. Who has the best command? It's not a great command group. I think command goes to Baz. I'm going to go Baz. I think I like Baz because if you're talking about standout secondary pitch, it's Baz's curveball versus MacKenzie Gore's curveball versus Cabrera's changeup. And I think it's close on all of them. If you're talking about fastball, model-wise, it goes Baz, Gore, Cabrera, actually, despite the velo.
Yeah. My instinct is Baz, but they're all close together for a reason. Could see really any or all of them being a little undervalued. Could also see them all tick up a little bit in price, too, as we get closer to the heart of draft season here in a month and a half or so. Interesting, too, just looking at the Rangers' kind of overall offseason moves. They made that swap, Semien for Nimmo. They signed Danny Jansen behind the plate. Now they trade for MacKenzie Gore. They're still within arm's reach of the Mariners and Astros, but behind them in terms of their team WAR projection. Again, I think I see a little more of like a wild card team right now, but who's to say that with good health outcomes and maybe like Wyatt Langford taking a step forward and a couple things up and down that roster working, they could kind of close that gap in short order. And probably a top 10 rotation now, at least based on projections for the Rangers, which is pretty interesting as well as you think about how dangerous they could be as a potential playoff team.
Yeah, they get 7th by Fangraphs depth charts, but I can't move them up. I was looking at this and, there's obviously some subjectivity that can go beyond, they are 7th on the depth chart, therefore they are 7th. I was looking at, what I might do if I was just ranking them myself. And I can't move them up because up is past the Blue Jays. Maybe. I wouldn't go past the Pirates, Phillies, Tigers. I don't think they belong up there. And in fact, you could move them down because behind them are the Braves, Reds, and Mariners. And each of those has, sort of fascinating, facets that they could argue. I mean, if Strider returns to form, then you sail Strider Schwellenbach with a, interesting Waldrop and healthy or not, Ronaldo Lopez like that. I think that stacks up pretty well. So, and then the Hunter Green, and Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo, like that. That's a fascinating Chase Burns. Like, so yes, I'll give him top 10. It might actually not be 7. It might be 8, 9, or 10. I'm also, I want to pin you in a corner here. I'm going to make you do a would you rather.
That's not how this works.
Hey, I know you think you're in charge, but sometimes I get to turn the tables on you. But if you were looking at the ADP list right now for starting pitchers or just for pitchers in general, Gore recently has been going as the 80th. Did you see that? He's going. Edward Cabrera is going 79th. MacKenzie Gore is 80th, and Shane Baz is 81st.
Yeah, that's why I threw that as a toss-up because they're all just stuck together very randomly.
Okay, but we did a little bit of the would you rather with those 3, but let's expand it a little bit. Would you rather would you rather Gore or Aaron Nola?
Probably going Nola. I just believe there's enough ways he can adjust. He's got a deep enough arsenal and good enough command where I think he can bounce back and be a 375, 115, 120 whip sort of guy. I think the ratios might just be a little better than Gore's, but the gap's small. Like there's a reason why they're clustered together, but I'm in on the Nola bounce back.
Okay, that's a veteran would you rather. How about another young pitcher that's maybe slightly more established? How about MacKenzie Gore versus Tanner Bybee, who's going a little bit ahead of him.
I think I'm going Tanner Bybee there. Really close. Bybee, how much trust should I still have in Cleveland finding more wrinkles for Bybee? I think what we saw in 2024 was really exciting. 3.47 ERA, 112 WHIP, over 173 innings, 12.2% swinging strike rate. That whiff rate, that dipped down to 10% last year. Like the underlying numbers behind the strikeout rate falling off scare me a little bit with Bybee, but he had something not long ago that was working, and he didn't lose much velo. It was like 0.3 miles per hour off the fastball. So I wonder if that's game planning, maybe some stubbornness, something else going on with Bybee that caused things to slip the way they did for him last year. So cautiously Bybee.
Bybee right now, by the model at least, by percentages, has 5 pitches he throws more than 10% of the time, and he throws a curve too. So he has 6 pitches now, and the model really likes all of them but the fastball. So, he is not a great fastball guy, and Gore is a good fastball guy, but there were times at which Gore seemed like a guy who had a fastball and nothing else. And we've run into pitchers like that. So there are different archetypes for sure, but I think it's a lot safer to take a Bybee with all those pitches and command of all of them than it is to, be sure that MacKenzie Gore will improve his command or, take advantage of all the new situational stuff.
There's enough that Gore does well, though, where if you were light on strikeouts at that point in your draft, I wouldn't think you're wrong for taking Gore instead. I trust Gore's Ks to be there a lot more than I trust Bybee to be a full bounce back in that particular category. So that's something to be kind of mindful of as well. And then, of course, if you're in a league where strikeout rate actually matters, not necessarily that it's a category, but if you have an innings cap, that'd be another case to maybe nudge Gore ahead too. So you got to think about those factors as well. But man, it's a tight cluster. That's kind of before that drop off after 200 where you have a harder time finding pitchers that you like. There's kind of a group that you can see yourself maybe taking 2 or 3 of in the rounds before that. Hey, let's go fill in bats, take a few, reliever shots or something else to sort of put the pieces all back together.
I think it's a decent place for a YOLO yo-yo because if you're looking at what's going on there, you have that MacKenzie Gore, Shane Baz, Edward Cabrera trio, which I think that there's a pretty low floor for those guys. Edward Cabrera has been hurt and been bad. Like he's been just straight up bad recently at times. And Gore has this potential, but has not quite, put it together for a full season. And Baz was pretty terrible last year, actually. But I think we love the underlying stuff. So I think pairing one of those guys with somebody like Aaron Nola or Luis Castillo, who goes around here, put someone boring with them. If you have to do it later, Merrill Kelly and that type of player is available just around there. So Zach Allen, I don't know if he counts anymore, but you put together a more boring veteran with one of those guys, and you hope you get lucky on both, but you also hope that one of them is good.
Yeah, the gap we're talking about will be fully discussed during pitcher week, during the first week of February, though. How you handle that. I like the idea of getting one of those new faces in a new place with a rebound candidate that might be a little bit more boring. Good way to balance out that pitching staff. We want to hear from you. We're asking you to fill out a quick survey about your podcast habits by going to theathletic.com/survey26. 3 lucky entries will win $100 worth of Amazon vouchers. So whether you're a longtime listener or a new one, we want your feedback. Go to theathletic.com/survey26. That's theathletic.com/survey26. That link will also be in the show description. Let's move on to some other big moves from this week. Freddy Peralta traded to the Mets as part of a 4-player deal. Tobias Myers also goes to the Mets. Coming back to Milwaukee is a combination of Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams. This time last year, in Keith Law's Mets prospect rankings, Sproat and Williams were prospects number 1 and 2. And their overall stock, I think, took a slight hit in 2025, which I think made it possible for the Brewers to get this kind of return. A lot to break down here in this trade, and let's just start with the Peralta side. Freddy Peralta, I think, was one of the more exciting pitcher development cases I've seen over my time as just a baseball fan. You go back to 2018, upon arrival, he was fastball Freddy, right? I mean, almost 80% four-seam usage back then, had the curveball, threw the occasional change, spent some time between rotation and bullpen early in his career, and then, of course, kind of in the middle of this whole window in Milwaukee, added some pitches. And the guy we saw in 2025 not only had more pitches, but he also had better command, too. Like the concern with Freddy Peralta upon arrival was that command would really go in and out. And the fact that he is a 4-pitch starter now with, I think, above average command by the Location Plus model is a huge development win in the long run. So the Brewers traded with the Mets. There was 1 year left on the extension he'd signed previously. So he's a free agent after 2026. The $8 million salary for this year made him appealing to anyone and everyone. And we'll get into some of the, why'd the Brewers trade him as part of this conversation as well. But I think one place I want to go here is just when you look at Freddy Peralta right now, the guy the Mets are lining up atop their rotation for 2026 as some of their other young starters continue to develop and become long-term fixtures. By that, I mean Nolan McLean and probably Jonah Tong. Like, what do you see with Freddy at this point? The only things that jumped off the page to me as like slightly fluky from 2025 were the left on base percentage got up near 85%. And I think that helped bring the ERA down under 3. But Freddy's one of those guys that gets a lot of weak contact. And with the great defense behind him in Milwaukee, always ran low BABIPs. So, like, can you confidently just buy in with the Mets to a mid-3s ERA and a 118 whip as projected by Oopsie?
Yeah, I've long been a big fan of his. I think one thing that led to last year's career year was just that he kind of avoided the bad month or two that he'd often had. I mean, in 23 and 24, he had these monthly splits where he basically had one awesome half and one not so great half. And he kind of last year just put together the good halves and didn't have the bad times. And there's some reasons to point to in terms of his pitch mix and stuff. I think the figuring out of the slider, which has changed some shapes and velos. And last year, he kind of went to the curveball more. But also the best command of his slider, of his 2 breaking balls that he'd had. I think that was something that comes over time. You don't, this is relevant to MacKenzie Gore too. You don't really throw your secondaries as often in bullpens. And so one thing that, does improve over time is breaking ball and secondary command, because you have to throw those in games really to repeat them especially they have to move at full. You have to throw them as hard as you can, and you won't really throw as hard as you can in your bullpens and your practice sessions, your December bullpens or whatever. So, the best practice is in game. And I think that's just like Freddy Peralta got better because he got older and he had more reps, and his command got better on the secondary pitches. I expect him to be great in New York. He's always had a better home split than an away split. That might have to do with some of the parks. He has to pitch in, and he had to pitch in. I expect that to continue. His home. I think maybe his home split will be even better in Citi Field. Maybe the divisional opponents are a little bit harder. I think that a mid-3s ERA, good whip, lots of strikeouts, that's all on the table.
Yeah, I wonder if he'll creep up a little bit in ADP, in part because I think there's always projections-driven skepticism around the Brewers and the quality of the run support he's going to get. It's always there, right? I mean, it's there with the Guardians, it's there with the Rays. It's just built in. But now I think the expectation is, hey, he's on a top 5 team by WAR projection. Win probability goes up a little bit. Bullpen protecting his leads is as good as it's been. So there's no downgrade in any facet except maybe defense. So he's 22nd among all pitchers right now by ADP. If you look at the last 2 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if he passed up, Logan Webb or Max Fried, kind of just moved up a half round or something. But I don't think a lot has actually changed in terms of my expectations for him. I think this is a guy that the Mets really needed, given the injuries some of their starters have dealt with, given some of the inexperienced pitchers they're going to be relying on more heavily. Freddy Peralta's made 95 starts over the last 3 seasons. I mean, that that type of workload really, I think, eases some of the pressure on their depth if he can stay healthy and continue to pitch at that level.
The would you rathers in my rankings as opposed to ADP, where I'm struggling a little bit to place him. He had a really good season last year, but his projections, from Oopsie, they're a little bit lighter. Like they're a little bit worse than the top 15 guy. I mean, so the would you rather right now is George Kirby. And George Kirby's ERA projection from Oopsie is, a tenth of a run better. His strikeout rate's a little bit lower. I would expect them both to maybe be around 170 plus innings. So who would you rather?
I'd take Freddy. I think the K's are a little more reliable, and that to me is an easy difference maker, at least for 1 year. I mean, the possibility of George Kirby locking in and nudging up that K rate, changing his usage again, and finding the mix that's ideal. It's always been there. It's part of why we like him, but Freddie does it year after year after year. You're getting a high 20% K rate, almost guaranteed, which for Kirby would be, I think, a little bit of a surprise for me right now.
Behind him, I have Spencer Schwellenbach. I'm going to keep Schwellenbach behind him because despite some similarities in projections, I'm just going to give Schwellenbach fewer innings because he's coming off an injury. And I think there is a little bit of an unknown as to what Spencer Schwellenbach's fastball velo will be. He really spiked in velo and then attributed his elbow injury to that spike. So will he come back and try to throw a little bit more softer to retain his health? And what will that mean for all of his numbers? Also behind Freddy Peralta, I have Logan Webb, but Logan Webb goes ahead of Freddy Peralta in drafts. I just love Logan Webb and Framber Valdez as number 2s because I think that they have super high floors. I think that the innings will be there, and their ERAs are always low. But their whips aren't always great, and their strikeout rates are nearly league average. And so I'm going to take a Freddy Peralta over those guys.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at, too. I'm more comfortable with Freddie than Logan Webb at their respective prices. Again, Ks are important in the leagues I play in, and I'm not sure how much I want to buy into what Webb did last year. 26.2%, up from 20.5%. He might keep some of it. Projections say kind of split the difference. 23% might be the answer. Again, you're getting a lot more from Freddie in that regard, and I think the whip comes in a little bit better too. That's the way I'm splitting the difference between them right now. I think the other angles for this trade, I mean, the Brewers get Brandon Sproat, and some people thought maybe it'd be Jonah Tong, and I'm curious how you value them against each other. Maybe Tong wasn't even really an option for this trade if Jet Williams was also going to be included, right? We don't have all of the fly-on-the-wall type details.
Or maybe the Brewers chose Sproat.
Maybe they preferred Sproat. So I guess if that was a toss-up, if that was a decision to be made, which side of that are you on? Who do you think actually has a better outlook, at least for 2026, but also for the long haul?
I think I would keep Sproat because he has a wider arsenal. If you compare the two, you can see already just by Stuff Plus alone that, Sproat has the potential for 3+ pitches in the sinker, sweeper, and curveball. Even if that curveball is similar in shape, he's a sinker sweeper guy with strong enough four seam and gyro slider and changeup to think that, he's got at least the kind of Clark Schmidtian package. Whereas Jonah Tong, the comp is Tim Lincecum, but that's a high bar to reach because if you don't quite reach Tim Lincecum's excellence and you only get Tim Lincecum's injury history, you know what I mean? And short peak, then, you may have some issues there. But, and Tong's strikeout rate is amazing. And maybe that's more relevant than his stuff numbers because of his extreme arm angle. I could see maybe the Mets saying, we think this is such an extreme arm angle. He's so weird. We love the weird. Brandon Sproat is more conventional. He is more that Clark Schmidt, Michael King, sinker sweeper guy, Will Warren. There's a whole tree of people. That's what Brandon Sproat has come out of, and what you see over time is that the sweeper numbers will go down in terms of Stuff Plus. We just did a retrain of the model, the Stuff Plus model, where we took out 20 and 2021 and are now training it on more recent data. because we've seen that pitchers, like batters over time, have gotten better at hitting sweepers. And so in order to represent what's really happening on the ground right now, we thought, let's retrain this on more recent numbers, and all the sweeper values went down. So maybe the Mets are like, hey, sweepers are going to be less and less, fruitful in the future. Brandon Sproat's best pitch is a sweeper. Let's just make the most out of him we can now. Now, the other thing is command. Now, I don't think that the command is a big separator between Tong and Sproat, but it might be a reason that the Mets felt like they could move on from Sproat because, we have location plus, and it's only in 300 major league pitches for Sproat. And so you could say, well, that's on the small side to have an 85 location plus. He can't be that bad. He only had an 8% walk rate. How are you saying his command is that bad? Well, I thought I would point out one thing real quick. Fangraphs prospect grade on the command. I was really surprised when I saw this. 35/45. So there are some things that Sproat does well. Large arsenal, good sweeper, good sinker, good foundation, model pleaser in most regards. There are some flaws in there. How good is the four-seamer actually? How good is the command? Because, one of the differences between Will Warren and Michael King, who profile very similarly, is that Michael King can command the heck out of that changeup. He really can command the heck out of that changeup. So if Sproat doesn't have great command, then he's a sinker sweeper guy who's always going to be struggling against lefties.
Yeah, I think you can easily look at Sproat, though, and say, okay, there's enough to work with where in the worst case outcome, he's a high leverage reliever with maybe more pitches than a typical high leverage reliever. But if the Brewers see something they can change, which is harder, I think it's harder to talk yourself into that when you're trading with your former president of baseball operations. Like you're dealing with someone that might look through the lens pretty similar to the way you do, but you still can't rule it out. It's still different orgs, different philosophies, different approaches to things. Maybe the Brewers can afford to be a little more patient with Sproat than the Mets could, right? Like their urgency is a little different, even though the Brewers continue to have a lot of success, going about their business this way year in and year out. So I'm really curious to see initial role, if he gets more time at AAA. There's a lot of things on the table right now, I think, with Brandon Sproat. It might be more of a late spring, early summer sort of arrival and beginning of the payoff for what he can do for the Brewers, depending on what they have in mind for him.
You're my Brewers guy. Rank the starting pitchers there in terms of not upside or how good they are, but just innings. Rank the Brewers starters on innings this year.
How many they would like to get from everybody, or how many they are likely to get from everyone? Because I almost think there's some tricky stuff in here. Like Woodruff and Jacob Mizorowski are clearly the 1-2 in terms of stuff, talent, and expectations.
Yeah,
Woodruff's injury, the major shoulder injury, and the multiple setbacks that he had, random kind of setbacks on a rehab assignment last year, just kind of piled on him to the point where the health grade's still extremely low, but he could bounce back and give them 150 this year because he's finally out of that rehabbing window and truly maybe back to feeling something like himself again. And I think the adjustments he made last year were really encouraging. I think you're looking for 140 to 150 from Woodruff and Miz, if everything goes well, knowing that there's a possibility that neither of them reaches that level. I would probably bucket Quinn Priester and Chad Patrick as the 3 and 4 right now, knowing that Patrick was phenomenal in the bullpen during the postseason, and maybe that ends up being his role, and the depth may afford them more options. And then you've got Logan Henderson, who had a late season forearm injury that I think could actually provide a decent amount of bulk if he's healthy, maybe as the number 5 right now. It's weird because they've got Robert Gasser, they've got Coleman Crowe, who's dealt with a lot of injuries in the minors that could chew up some innings, maybe a lot at some point. Ashby could shift back into starting, I guess that's possible. I think it's lower probability that DL Hall does that at this point. And then Angel Zerpa, who they got in that trade with the Royals, also could be in the mix to start at some point, right? So it's just like this huge cluster of guys that could offer them different things. And I think maybe if I'm really thinking critically more about like the likeliest outcomes, Quinn Priester might lead this team in innings in 2026.
But then I'm also really interested in the back end because, you know, I think I agree with you. I think I agree that Quinn Priester is going to lead in innings, but, you know, Logan Henderson, Robert Gasser, Brandon Sproat all have options. So is that just a open competition in the spring?
Could be. But maybe they're not done. Are they done? It's not necessarily because the wild thing about this is like losing Fred. It's a big loss. Like you lose Freddy Peralta, it's a big loss. They have the depth to make it easier to tell yourself that it could be okay. These trades don't always work out. You know, it's not like you just automatically get more from everybody else. They're just in a unique position where they just
don't put Sproat right into the rotation, and he's Freddy Peralta.
Right. But someone else might do a little bit more. A few someone else's might do a little bit more. Like that's just kind of how it works with this org.
Yeah, the right now are pretty much exactly where they ended last year in terms of payroll. So I don't know that they're going to add anybody off free agency. Their free agent signing so far, there's been one. It's Akil Baddoo for $1 million.
Yeah, it's just, it'd just be more trades, more likely than not. They're Mark Attanasio has been stingy with the budget,
but they have done the like Jose Quintana 1-7 type thing before, or you know 1 and I don't forget what they actually gave him. I don't know that it'll be Jose Quintana himself, but you know, in terms of like the 1-7, like Chris Paddock, it would infuriate you. That would be hilarious.
It's not going to happen. Joe Sheehan wrote about this in his newsletter. The roster resource depth chart right now has 5 lefties in the Brewers bullpen. Like that's not how the season's going to begin, right? It's what they have in the org right now. I get why it's listed like that, but you can't look at that and be like, "Yep, that's definitely the finished product."
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. But that actually makes a little bit of an argument for Yoho maybe actually making the roster, right? Because he's not left-handed.
Oh, wow. We're really getting back into the weeds when it comes back around to Yoho. We're not a Brewers podcast. We're definitely not.
But there's some consternation. You got an email, and this is we received from Jesse, and I think this is an interesting perspective. I think that is valid. These trades are not an inevitability. They are not the way to operate. They are not. These are not realities forced on our poor owners. I get it. However, you know, I think from the reason why baseball analysis might fall into like, oh, this is a smart, savvy move by the Brewers, or why we've been predicting this trade for a long time, is not so much that we find it an inevitability for all teams. And it's even if we just think this is how the Brewers work, we're not. I would say, for at least for myself, I'm not trying to be an apologista for, you know, what their decisions are for here. It's more just we don't have a sightline into their finances. I mean, this is part of the thing that's really frustrating to be a fan, to be a writer, to be. So the only team that we really know everything about their finances is the Braves. You know? So, and they actually went and spent, you know, $115 million this offseason. Maybe these things are related, but without knowing what number is put in front of, you know, the GM by the owner, which this happens. Every GM has a number that's put in front of them. They usually all try to spend every single dime that they are given in the budget. And they will even go to the owner and ask for more for a specific player, and sometimes get it. But it's hard to walk the line as a writer and as an analyst to be like, this is how the Brewers are going to act because this is how they've acted in the past. This is how we think their budget looks like. This is how they've, you know, this is from the outside what it looks like, while not, you know, sort of making it okay. I mean, it would be better if the Brewers had kept Peralta. You know, it would be better for them this year, and they could put a QO on him and get a draft pick back. So, you know, that was an opportunity that was afforded them. Maybe it wasn't once Brandon Woodruff stayed in town because we don't actually know what the number is that's in front of the GM. You know what I mean?
Right. But to the point of Jesse's email, at least one point, it's just like they could have just kept Freddy Peralta and kept Brandon Woodruff after extending him the qualifying offer. They had to have at least, even if ownership had a number in mind, the front office had to think about all these different scenarios. And I mean, I think part of it is, do you think the Corbin Burns trade was actually a good return, getting Joey Ortiz and DL Hall back? Like at the time, we're like, oh, DL Hall might still be good. He's just been hurt. And Joey Ortiz, we kind of like the bat. We know the glove's good. The bat was worse than we expected to be in 2025. And DL Hall just looks like a lefty reliever.
I remember I liked Ortiz, but what I liked about it was that those seemed like expendable pieces for the Baltimore.
Easily. So, at the time, those looked like guys that the Orioles didn't really need, and they were trading for Corbin Burns closer to his peak. And in the end, I mean, it's like, yeah, two guys that contribute to your big league roster, being a starting shortstop and a great defensive starting shortstop, that's worth something. And having that cost controlled for a few years, obviously that's worth something. But the frustration, I think, from fans, even when you're winning, is real, especially if you get to trade deadlines and the requests for more money from your front office to ownership are ultimately rejected. If you don't have the green light to either go spend more or to push more chips in for the now at various points, like that I think is the part that really starts to wear on you a little bit. Freddy Peralta's, I think Jesse mentioned, it's his favorite pitcher, favorite player. Like, he's been in the organization for a long time. And it's like, knowing this is sort of just how things will go for the bulk of the players in the org, it's a tougher fan experience. Rays fans know this. Guardians fans know this. It's just the way small market teams have kind of found their way to stay competitive every year. But we definitely don't have to like it. We definitely don't have to sit here and say every trade they make is good. And they've got something a little bit different in what they're willing to take back and seek out in terms of position players. Jet Williams is another short position Kings, player.
Baby. He's 5'7", baby.
I think it's just like, I know this is not what it is, but it's like, let's find the next Pedroia. Let's find the next Pedroia. Let's find the next Pedroia.
Make the whole plane out of Pedroia.
Or it's just that, people often overcorrect for the shortcomings of a smaller player. I think
I have to say something biomechanically real quick. Bigger players throw the ball harder and hit the ball harder. It's just that's like a fact of biomechanics.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's generally what you're going to get from them, right? And I think with Jet, the questions are about defensive fit. Is he average in center, average at short, maybe a little above average at second? How do you fit his glove into the mix? Do you play him at short over Joey Ortiz? Do you play him as part of your outfield rotation? Do you play him at second and move Bryce Terang over to short and then just make Ortiz a backup? All kind of fair questions. I think what's weird about Jet Williams is that the performance in the minor leagues has fluctuated quite a bit. There's a little bit more swing and miss in his game for a smaller player. You see K rates 22, 23, 24% since the time he's hit AA, basically. So it's not like your 15% and under small guy, small K rate sort of approach, but there's a little bit more in-game pop than you might expect. He hit 7 homers in 34 games at AAA at the end of last year. The overall numbers weren't great. And he hit 10 more in 96 games at AA. And he steals some bases. So he definitely fits into the player types that they have been comfortably drafting and trading for now. I mean, Caleb Durbin, undersized player. Sal Frelick, first rounder a few years ago, undersized player. This is just something they're comfortable with.
Yeah, Lance Brzezowski shared some minor league stats for Jet Williams this season, and he has an comfortably above average chase rate. And he whiffs less than league average on 95 plus mile an hour, and he whiffs less than league average on spin rate, on high spin rate pitches, on spin breaking balls. So, here's a guy who makes contact, makes pretty good contact. His 90th percentile EV was above average, a mile per hour above average for the average minor league shortstop. So I would say that I don't know that he hits the ball super hard, but he makes good decisions. He lifts the ball. His hard hit balls had a 14-degree launch angle versus a 10 on average, again, against shortstop. So there is a little bit of risk here that if he's not a shortstop, then he's not really an everyday player in the big leagues, right?
But
even when
if you can play both middle infield spots and center field, you're a good bench player.
And that actually has been part of the profile of players they've gotten. So if you think about Joey Ortiz, Durbin, and Turang, or just even Joey Ortiz and Durbin and Jet Williams, there's this we don't exactly know where he'll fit, but he will be able to play, on the dirt, and we don't know exactly what his power upside is, but he doesn't have zero power. And we do know that he makes good contact and makes good plate decisions, right? So he really fits into the Durbin and Joey Ortiz package to that regard. Does he have the standout shortstop defense that Joey Ortiz does? No, but Joey Ortiz's bat, if it doesn't recover anything this year, it may push him off the position. We may have Turang at short, and that opens up second for Durbin or Jet Williams. And even if you don't think Jet Williams is a shortstop, there's probably a place for him to make an impact on this Brewers roster in the next couple of years. I don't know how quickly it'll be, because right now they're still running through Joey Ortiz, Andrew Monasterio, and there's Siegler, there was Frelick was taking grounders at third. So they're still running through other options, and they don't necessarily need to play Williams in the big leagues. But the guys I did mention, Monasterio, Siegler, and Frelick is more of an outfielder now. You kind of see it. What if Monasterio just doesn't do anything more? They might say we need a little bit more offensively, or there might be an injury on the infield, or they might just say Ortiz is going to take the Monasterio role. Monasterio, we have to move on from him, and we're going to try Turang and Williams up the middle.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts, and that's part of the design for the Brewers. So. Thank you for that email, Jesse. I agree. I mean, we don't have to just frame everything as inevitable, because this wasn't as inevitable as you would think. This one is one they could have played a little bit differently, with the financial situation being a lot different for Freddy Peralta than it was for Burns at the end of arbitration as well. But I think they trust their depth, they trust their scouting, and they trust their player development, which is fun to watch, but it makes you nervous every winter when they do this. Eventually, you miss badly enough, and a couple things go wrong, and you're on the outside looking in October. It took us 54 minutes to get to Cody Bellinger's return to the Yankees. See, maybe we are a Brewers podcast, just masquerading as something else. This also seemed kind of like the most likely outcome all along, even though the decision to give Trent Grisham the qualifying offer and Trent Grisham's decision to accept it probably delayed the process a little bit. Cody Bellinger gets 5 years, $162.5 million. He's got opt-outs after 2027 and 2028. I don't think those are really going to be big factors, because I think Cody Bellinger is a very good player. I think reuniting with the Yankees made a lot of sense, given the damage he was doing at Yankee Stadium and kind of the average sort of production he was giving on the road. And I think running it back with what they had last year for their position player group, for the most part, isn't necessarily as bad as it seems, because they had a good position player group last year. This was a good team that just got bounced in the playoffs by a really good Jays team. That's just kind of how playoff baseball works. So I can see Yankees fans being itchy and antsy and frustrated by things looking so similar to the way they did a year ago, but ultimately, it's sort of like, is your team better with Cody Bellinger, or is your team better without Cody Bellinger for 2026? And they're quite a bit better, I think, with him.
Yeah. I think that's the best argument for this deal are market-based arguments. The fact that the Yankees are a top 5 team by projected WAR, that they have to win every year, and that this was one of the last players that was available that was comfortably above league average, and could move the needle. The last kind of guy that you'd bat in the top 4 of your lineup, and has defensive value. So I don't mind it from acquiring the player, but I do have some questions about the contract that I brought up in the YouTube short that we did, which is to say that if you just look at how much they spent and then look at projections, you could say that they spent twice the market rate on this. So, I mean, we're talking north of $22 million per win on Bellinger going forward. However, that was using the least optimistic projection, which is oopsie. And now, why do I use Oopsie? Well, because if you look at Cody Bellinger's expected slugging for the last 3 years, it is, like 50 to 100 points below where his actual slugging was. And you look at his barrel rates, they haven't been great. The quality of contact is not really that good for Bellinger anymore since his shoulder injury. And, Oopsie represents a worst case outcome, which is that he's a league average player next year in the first year of a 5-year contract, in which case he doesn't opt out. And you do have to pay him $160 million. And then he's a below league average player the year after that, in year 2 of a 5-year contract. That is a possibility. There were a couple things that got pointed out on, in a discussion on social media about this that I thought were interesting. One was, you look at Bellinger's spray chart and he's a great fit for that park. So maybe the expected slugging versus actual slugging differential is just, hey, we've matched this player to our park and he works for us. And so he's going to continue to outproduce his expected slugging. And that's why we're going to bet on him. The other is that he's always been thought of as a good defender. Last year, he had good defensive value and put up nearly 5 wins above projection. And yet every projection system, it says he's going to be a negative in defensive value next year, even Oopsie. And Jordan has sent me a projected StatCast defense number that has Cody Bellinger right there with Corbin Carroll and other, 7 OAA type, 7 fielding runs type above average left fielders. I looked at Corbin Carroll. I looked at a bunch of the other guys that are around him on that list, and they all have negative defensive value projected. So I feel like maybe this is just what projection systems do. They regress defense. If you look at the Blue Jays, people have been asking, why does Dalton Varsho and Ernie Clement, why do they have negative defensive projections? And I would just say it looks like this is what projection systems do. They heavily regress defensive value.
Yeah, I'm glad the point about the X slug gap from the actual slug gap came up because, the home ballpark's going to offset that a lot. And, well, you signed them to a 5-year deal and you're not changing your ballpark in those 5 years. At least we don't expect the fences to be adjusted at Yankee Stadium during that window. So fit is everything here. I mean, look, we're still seeing Jason Dominguez making adjustments to the big leagues. So in our minds, he's the Martian. He's a future superstar, but maybe the progress toward becoming his ceiling is going to take a little bit longer than we'd like. And the Yankees can't afford to trot him out there every single day if everyone's healthy and have him not play at the level they expect, right? So Grisham's only there on the qualifying offer. Grisham's gone after this year. So then you've got, less of a crowd already in 2027. Stanton breaks a lot anyway. So the depth you've built up is probably necessary. And again, I'll emphasize this as like a good reminder that playoff baseball is fun and chaotic, and it's not necessarily indicative of the quality of your team on a macro level. Like that projection for the Yankees being where it is just reminds all of us that they are still a very well-built team. I think where people get that itchy nervousness, though, is the fact that every team in the AL East, well, all but one, even the Rays are shuffling things around and trying to do their typical Rays stuff to make some adjustments. Everybody in the AL East is pushing chips in right now. So that's the part that I think probably makes the Yankees fans lose a little sleep at night.
Yeah. I would just say, again, like there's a lot of panic around the Yankees. And I would just say, again, that it's a good team. And they've got, some pieces coming back. I would say that it's not, there's like, why would you just run it back? You're just getting Cody Bellinger back. It didn't work last time. Well, it did work out all right. They tied the Blue Jays, at the top of their division, and the playoffs can be a crapshoot. So why not run it back and see what happens in the postseason? And then I think, you have Garrett Cole coming back. You have a full season of Cam Schlittler. You traded for Ryan Weathers. Luis Heel could be different this year. Clark Schmidt's coming back. Full season of Bednar in the bullpen. Full season, of Rice at first. I think there's some differences here that could be meaningful. And the Yankees are still going to be a top 5 team for me going into the season next year.
Yeah, and questions about the left side of the infield are real. Like, what are they going to get from Ryan McMahon at this stage, and what's Volpe going to look like with a healthy shoulder eventually?
And is Caballero like just a good enough shortstop if the Volpe thing doesn't work out, or what's going on there for sure? And then long-term questions about what happens at center, because I don't know that I want to move Cody Bellinger back to center after Grisham. And I don't know with Spencer Jones, that strikeout rate, I don't know that I'm like anointing him the future center fielder. I don't share any upbeat feelings about Jason Dominguez in center. So, I do think there's a little bit of a question long-term in center. Maybe a long-term, maybe an extension for Jazz Chisholm where you move him to center. I don't know what the deal is, but there's a fun little rumor going around about baseball that some people thought was Yankees related, but there was something about Cameron Maben saying something about, here's the tweet. Man, I just got some major inside info on a major player quietly working on a positions change. If this sticks, it could reshape the entire roster. And so everyone's been thinking, people were talking about Judge on the infield dirt, or Rice at third. I don't think either of those things are happening. There was some question about Juan Soto to first. I don't know. Does that change the entire roster? I don't think it helps. What are you doing? You're putting Polanco at DH and Vientos in left or right, or I don't know. Like, it doesn't. That's not it. I don't know who it is. I'm intrigued, and Cameron Maben hasn't told us more, but
just tell us. Come on. Like, why can't you tell us?
Shohei in the field.
I mean, okay, that would change some things, but
what would it change? It wouldn't reshape the whole roster. It would just be like, okay, Teoscar DH.
If it was going to reshape the whole roster, it'd be a team that doesn't have a starting shortstop, moving an outfielder to shortstop, and then just like,
oh, that's why they were talking Ronald Acuna in the Discord. They're talking Ronald Acuna to shortstop. Now that would reshape the roster.
Like Jack Centurio playing shortstop, since we're a Brewers podcast, right?
Yeah, right.
I don't think it's that, but
that would do a lot. Yeah.
It changed some things, right? It would just make you rethink a few things about what's going on. A couple mailbag things to get to real quick before we go. Again, email from Arjun. Is dollars per WAR still relevant to contracts anymore?
Yeah, there are definitely problems with it. There's a great piece by Michael Rosen on Fangraphs about how relievers are paid by championship win probability added. And it's just the idea of like, what will this reliever do for us in the playoffs that pushes those Edwin Diaz salaries higher. Having Edwin Diaz in the playoffs, it means almost even more than having him over the course of the season versus Ben Kasparius as the closer, right? Like, that'd probably work okay, but that what Edwin Diaz can give you in the playoffs, where you'd be guessing with Kasparius. And then there are other aspects where I think one of the things that's really hard is to use the dollars per WAR framework with options and these short-term deals, because you have to value the options correctly, and the way to do that is to be like, what is the percentage likelihood that they are this good, and if they're this good, that they like, what's the value of that option? That's how an options trader would do it. That's how an analyst would do it. Is like, what's the percentage likelihood they pick up the option? So then you put that percentage of the dollar cost into the contract, blah blah blah. So that's really hard to do for us public analysts in terms of valuing the options. Like, what is the actual expected dollar outlay for Kyle Tucker? Like, it's actually just a hard question to answer. But this is a long-winded way of saying there are some problems with maybe even public WAR systems, public understanding of how to value options, public understanding of certain things. There are some questions that we brought up about in terms of what's available in the market, what that team needs, where the team is on the win curve. However, every team still has a dollars per WAR, dollars per WAR type framework in-house, because they need to know a couple things. One, what do they think the market is doing? Then you need to have a sense of what the market is doing. You don't want to go out there and drop, $100 million extra on a player by accident. Like you sort of have an idea of what other people are going to offer this player. And then 2, you do actually have to have a sense of efficiency. If you wanted to build your entire team in free agency, according to dollars per win, you'd be spending $600, $700, $800 million on your roster. And they're no matter what you think of what these owners can do, like there are very few teams that can do that. So you do want to be efficient. You do want to have a sense of efficiency. And so dollars per roar or something like it, an efficiency metric will always have a place in baseball. And so I've asked this of analysts that I trust to talk about it. And they said, yeah, every team still has a dollars per roar type framework. They still use it. Will we go past? Some teams will go past it. Some teams won't. Some teams are, tied to their model, and some people will go past their model, but they all have one.
Yeah, I think what else can you do with that roster spot or with those dollars is always a huge part of it too. And I think that's why maybe the Mets looked at where the Bellinger market was and said, at 5 and 162.5, we'd rather trade for Luis Robert. We'd rather give up Luis Angel Acuna and the 8th round pitcher out of Harvard, I think was the other guy they threw in, right? That doesn't matter as much to us as those dollars will, because maybe we're going to spend that money on Tarek Skubal, and eventually it's all still got to fit in our budget, no matter how deep the pockets of ownership are. There's going to be some kind of limit, and we feel like we're just as good with Luis Robert in 26 and maybe 27. We pick up that option, and we don't have to worry about 28, 29, and 30 right now. We'll solve that problem either with the prospects we have right now, or via trade, or via future free agency too. But also, we know, there's free agency is not where you get bargains generally. There are some, but long-term deals in free agency are not where you're really going to say, I'm saving money here. You're saving money on other parts of your roster with league minimum and ARB players that are priced well below their actual market value. So in that sense, you can overspend if you have a perfect fit, like a Tucker, that fills the last need that you have. And also your situation's different because you have boatloads of TV money. But again, it's not the only thing that matters when analyzing contracts. I think we probably were collectively pushing that very hard for the past 2 decades almost. And it seems like it's starting to cool just a little bit. Thanks for that email, Arjun. We're going to do some more mailbag stuff soon. There was one other Discord comment that I thought was interesting from Keegan. Craig Counsell said at the end of the season, he told Michael Busch he'd be playing every day. He won't be sitting him against lefties like he has in the past. So something Counsell said on stage during CubsCon last weekend. As you may know, I did not attend CubsCon and would never attend a CubsCon. So I did miss that at the expense of just disregarding CubsCon completely. That being said, do we trust Craig Counsell? Do we take him at his word on this one? Because the Cubs have a lot of guys that can just be everyday players. As far as the rule of 5, that'll come up a lot in our team previews. There's no concern about they can only platoon these many spots because they have to play 5 guys every day. They got more than 5 guys that can play every day. Do you trust Craig Counsell that Michael Busch will play more or even regularly against lefties in 2026?
Well, I'm a little nervous about some of the stuff I said about Michael Busch in terms of quality of contact and bat speed, and how those fit together. And so I feel like if there's some regression from Michael Busch that's just natural, if he's, for example, the 115 WRC plus player that the Bat X says he will be, then they will be tempted to play Tyler Austin over him. Because if you have a 115, if you're a 115 true talent, if you're like a 120 true talent against against righties, you could be anywhere from 100, 105. You could be a league average player against lefties, and then Tyler Austin, they signed to this actual deal. But then also DH is up in the air. You have Moises Ballesteros, who is he a good enough hitter to just be a DH? And he doesn't seem like a catcher. So, maybe they actually signed Tyler Austin to be somewhat of a everyday DH. But then you have Seiza Suzuki, and they just signed Chas McCormick. So it is a little bit of, we do these position previews early to help people with their early drafts. But there are always questions of how this roster might develop going forward. I just saw Tyler Austin as a perfect platoon partner for a player they've platooned in the past. And so even though the manager might say that, you fall into past habits pretty quickly. And the roster is built this way. You could also just put Shaw in as a utility guy and as the DH, and you'd basically have a platoon partner there too in the right-handed Shaw. So I feel like, he's the easiest guy to platoon. They platoon him in the past, and I know they say they won't, but I lean a little bit towards, I think they probably still will.
Yeah, maybe it's a softer platoon, though. Interesting to point out, and I think it's worth wrestling with that as your drafts approach, because if Busch ends up playing more than expected, then there is some extra value where he's going in drafts right now. Our platoon concerns were enough to maybe veer away at the price. And again, the league format, daily versus weekly, huge. I'm not shying away in daily leagues at all because this just doesn't bother me. If he sits against lefties, fine. If he plays against them, I'll just evaluate him against the other options in my lineup that day.
Yeah, and it is just interesting that this bench is righty heavy. Chas McCormick, Tyler Austin, Matt Shaw, and you also pointed out that this is an everyday team. So are you just going to have those three on your bench and never play them, or are you going to mix them in? And if you mix them in, you're like, oh well, here's an easy spot.
I think you can probably tell yourself that they want to be careful with Seiya Suzuki defensively, that he'll still DH a lot, even if he plays enough in right field.
I think Ballesteros might not make this roster.
Ballesteros has options, so they could send him down if they want to. They've got Amaya and Kelly, so they have two catchers, and I think Ballesteros' defense is enough of a question too, where maybe they want him to catch more, and they have the healthy bench they want to begin the year. So there's a few ways it can come together. We'll dig into it more, though, during the Cubs team preview here in a few weeks. Thanks a lot for that message, Keegan. Really appreciate that. Also saw the Discord chiming in that Kyle Manzardo has added 14 pounds of muscle this offseason. I love this the specificity of that. 14. It's well measured. It's accounted for.
Well, it might be 13.7.
Well, yeah, but it's not 15.
Yeah, right.
So, hey, if Kyle Manzardo comes back and it's 35 home runs, I'll be happy, even if I don't have him on my team. I think it'd be a nice development for the Guardians to get that from him, and that is going to be a mess of a depth chart to sort out here in the next couple of weeks. Join our Discord, become part of the conversation if you haven't joined already. The link is in the show description. Thanks to everybody who made this all the way to the end of this episode. Another long episode. Position previews continue next week. Enjoy the weekend. Stay warm. We're back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.